What's going on, y'all? It's your girl, Mary B. Welcome back to another episode of Something's Gotta Give. And I do have to give a trigger warning for this episode because I'm going to be talking about the experiences I had with being physically abused and raped before the age of 5, and how I've been able to face head on what I consider to be the most traumatic event of my life and heal from it. I spent the first few years of my life with my mother's side of the family in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And my mother didn't give my aunt and uncle a warning of my arrival. So I quickly took on the energy of being a burden to this family. I didn't want to cause too much attention or ask for too much because there was already a lot going on within the household. It was my aunt and uncle. I had 2 cousins that were around my age, and I had an older cousin who I remember to be in high school. And because my aunt and uncle had to go to work daily to be able to provide for the family financially, that left my oldest cousin to be essentially our babysitter, the parent of the household when the real parents weren't around. My 2 cousins that were around my age shared a room in the 3-bedroom apartment that we stayed in. My aunt and uncle obviously had their own room, which left me to be living in the room with my oldest cousin. And I did not feel welcome or invited in that room at all. It was his room, and I had a little corner in his room that had like a cot and my blankets, and that's what I slept in every night. And that's where I was being raped every single night. But I didn't remember what was going on with me, not to the depth of what I know now. Because when my mother finally came to pick me up and I moved back to the United States, I locked my experience that I had in Brazil in a very deep, dark box that I never wanted to find in my subconscious. So Portuguese was my first language, right? But when I moved back to the United States and I learned English, I completely forgot Portuguese. I never talked to my mother's side of the family. I forced myself to not remember anything from there because I did not want to remember or feel what I was enduring every night. Now, as I was growing up, there would sometimes be glimpses or memories that would come up, and I hated them. So I would find that deep, dark box somewhere in my subconscious, and I would just shove away whatever was coming up. But you can't run from the truth for forever. You can't run from yourself for forever. So as I got older, these memories wanted to come up more and more often. And I've shared with you that I found myself having an early signs of what an addict is, what an addict turns out to be. Now, addiction runs in my dad's side of the family, and due to the amount of trauma I experienced, I found myself kind of going down that route in my 20s. And I found myself always wanting to be away from myself, and I didn't understand why at the time. I never even wanted to understand why at that time. I always kept myself busy, whether it be me working too much, whether it be me going out to every social event possible, whether it be me being too available to so many friends, or whether it be me trying to find a man to date, a relationship to be too occupied in, overoccupied in. Where can I go for my energy to be completely depleted that I don't have to face all these traumatic events I endured in my childhood? Well, therapy started for me almost 2 years ago. And throughout therapy, you hit a point where talk therapy isn't enough because trauma is also stored within the body. So you can talk about the same subject a million times, but you have to allow your body to really feel in order to move on and heal from the traumatic experience. So my therapy sessions evolved into a specific kind of therapy called EMDR, which stands for eye movement dissociation and reprocessing. Essentially, there are two ways to do EMDR. There's a visual aspect to it, and there is an audio aspect to it. I cry way too much throughout my therapy sessions for me to do the visual, so I chose to go the audio route. I'm not going to go into the specifics of how it all gets set up, but I will say that this form of therapy allows you to go into that deep, dark box that you've buried in your subconscious and remember all of the things that you've been working so hard to not remember. And at one point in time, your body, your brain did what it knew it had to do, which was burying a very painful part of your experience in order to keep you safe. But after years have passed and you're no longer in that space, your body's still in fight or flight. It's because you never released what you were experiencing. Throughout each EMDR session, I was able to have memories bit by bit come up of the experiences that I endured in Brazil. And I started to remember what the room looked like and how the house was set up and how my oldest cousin was responsible of taking care of us and how I didn't feel safe around him, but I had to lean on him for so much. And there was one particular memory of me accidentally going number 2 in the shower, and my therapist walked me through what she has learned through her experiences of doing this form of therapy, that I couldn't hold my bowels because of the rape that I was enduring every single night. And when those words came out of her mouth, that box that I had buried so deep in my mind just flooded open. And I remembered far too vividly the positions that I was put in for the rape that was happening basically every single night, that I had my mouth covered during these acts, that I was manipulated into keeping quiet because I would be seen as the bad child. I wouldn't be loved. Nobody would believe me, that it was the right thing to do to let him rape me. And man, oh man, was that an experience to have to relive that. Because EMDR is focused on releasing trauma that's stored in the body, every single time I had to relive this scenario in my therapy sessions, I found myself having the most intense physical reaction. So I would be slamming my body into the bed. I would be screaming at the top of my lungs. I would roll around on the floor. One time, my emotional reaction got so intense, I literally picked up the tripod that I'm recording this video on and threw it across the room, and it ended up hitting my desktop. So I have a chip in my desktop to show just how intense my therapy sessions were. But it was needed because I was never allowed to have that physical response during my rape. I was too young to physically fight him back. I wasn't allowed to scream because there was a hand over my mouth refusing any sound to come out. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody because I was scared for my life of what could happen if I did. And I already felt like the burden of the family. So I just kept quiet and I did what I thought I had to do, which was endure the most inappropriate of a sexual act that can occur to anybody to happen to me every single night. And it will never be okay. A man robbed me of my innocence far too young. A man introduced me to sexuality far too young before I even had the chance to decide and figure out what sexuality is for me. I was taught in the worst way possible of what a romantic relationship is, of what a man is, and how you should expect someone to treat you. And I understand now why I have been so many different versions of myself throughout the years with my experiences in romantic relationships, whether those relationships were long term or short term. I finally understood why, when it came time to be sexually intimate with somebody, I often time was very prude or very uncomfortable, and I sometimes began to rely on being under the influence, whether that be being high or oftentimes being drunk out of my mind, to indulge with somebody because I didn't feel comfortable, didn't feel safe in my body. But there was a version of me that kept making me feel that I needed to be indulging in sexual acts with somebody to be loved, to be seen, for this relationship to work out. And the reason why I felt that way was because of the very inappropriate introduction to that lifestyle that I experienced before the age of 5. I hate that I had those experiences with many of the men that I dated, but I understand why I did now, and I also understand why it didn't work out, because they were dating a traumatized version of me, a version of me that didn't know any better, a version of me that didn't know how to put herself first, and later on that would create problems within the relationship. I sometimes found myself not even being concerned with, was I enjoying the sexual act that I was involving myself in. I would allow men to just do whatever they wanted to do with my body, and sometimes it would hurt me so bad that I found myself crying or being out of touch with the person I just laid down in bed with, and having them ignore me and not tend to my needs after we just indulge in the most intimate matter, because I learned that it is okay to be ignored after being sexual with somebody. It is okay just as long as a man has been pleased. I now have learned so much about the act of sex within itself, that when you lay down with a man and you have his energy enter yours, you are now carrying his energy in your womb for the next 7 years. So oftentimes we go through breakups as women, and we wonder, why am I still thinking about this man? Why haven't I been able to let him go? Well, it's because he's still living energetically inside of you. We as women sometimes know far too often that a man is cheating on us, or he's doing something that he's not supposed to be doing, talking to somebody he's not supposed to be because he told you he's not, or being somewhere he knows he shouldn't be because you two have decided that is out of your contract terms of agreement within your relationship contract, and he ends up being there and you knew beforehand because you have him inside of you. Your intuition is speaking to you, and we don't trust that. We go out of our way to have his location on our phone and stalk his social media, and break into his phone and read these messages to then confirm what we already knew. We are the portal between the life of the unknown and this life. We birth the very beings we have sex with into this planet. We should never for a second doubt the power that we have within us. But we do. We oftentimes procreate with partners and have children out of very selfish desires. And when we have those children come into life, we realize that being a parent is actually the most selfless thing you can do in this life. You have to put yourself aside completely to now raise your seed. And when you enter the act of being a parent from selfish desires, and you end up learning that it is a selfless job. We have parents who are no longer present, which oftentimes leads these kids to be in CPS, in foster care, and being adopted into homes, into people that aren't also fit to be parents. And the system of toxicity that these children have to endure, that has been going on, that is running rampant as an issue in our world, continues because of the inappropriateness that we indulge in sexually. If we only understood the power that comes from the most intimate act that you can do in this life, maybe we would have more control over the urges and sexual desires we all have. Now that I've learned that a lot of my behaviors were responses from being raped, being physically abused, I have chosen to just go through a period of cleansing myself from any sexual act. So I got rid of all of my sexual toys. I don't wear thongs anymore, which was primarily the only underwear I wore. I went out and bought myself just regular panties so I can embrace my innocence again, embrace my power. I know now that I don't have to be so willingly giving to men just to feel attention, to feel love, to feel seen. There are so much ways of being intimate with a partner aside of being sex. I know that I enjoy being mentally stimulated now before I enjoy being physically touched. I know that I need to be approached in every act of love before we get to the deepest one. I know I have the right and the power to say no to a man if I choose not to be that way with him, and that he has to respect that my voice matters, that you just can't take advantage of me. I have taught my inner child that we can trust this adult version of me because I now have the power to protect us both. And going through the memories, the trauma that was stored in my body, being able to release that was the most intense, probably hardest part of my life I've had to endure, because healing doesn't just happen within that hour of my EMDR therapy sessions, right? It happens every day of my life. So I have moments where I randomly have to cry, where I randomly have to scream. I have to be able to know that I will be okay. But the only way to heal is to be able to go through it. So no, I can't just find another man to place on top of this experience. I can't drink my way through this. I can't smoke my way through this. I can't call on somebody else to make them go through this experience. I have to go through this experience by myself in solitude and figure out how I'm going to get through this. So what does my inner child need to do throughout this time? Does she need to cry? Does she need to be hugged? I had to learn how to be able to hug myself. I had to learn that being there for my inner child is an odd act, because you have to act like a child in some ways, you know, like, do I want to color right now? Do I want to play with a Barbie? Do I want to go to the park? Do I want to jump rope? Do I want to be on the swings? Like, I have to do something that little Mary wanted to do but wasn't able to do for whatever reason. Learning how to do inner child work is interesting because we live in a society that we're taught as adults we can't do childish acts, but doing childish acts is what keeps life alive, is what keeps you healing, is what keeps you centered, aligned. Being in touch with your inner child is what is the energetic life force of this life. It's where your imagination, your artistic form is created, is where it lives. And I know maybe not everybody is in a position to pay for therapy, to find a therapist that has EMDR experiences, but you don't have to go through that route. I learned a lot about trauma through books. I highly recommend The Body Keeps Score. Your body doesn't know what time it experienced that trauma or what age you are. It's stored in a certain area, in a certain place within your chakras, and you have to learn how to release that. There is a book called The Eastern Body, Western Mind that teaches you about your chakras and how it's out of alignment and how to get it back into alignment. There's Do the Work, and that teaches you about showing up for yourself daily within the present, to not allow your past to create your present continuously, and noticing when your past is trying to create your present, and telling yourself like, hey, we don't want to do that anymore. That's no longer in alignment with this current self. Let's do this thing instead. And eventually the new thing that you do time and time again in your present becomes your new DNA, because becomes your new subconscious. No, we cannot control what happened to us in the past, but that past thing happened to you in order for you to learn exactly what you needed to learn from, alchemize it to become powerful, to become better, to be able to transmute energy. The whole purpose of life is being able to transmute energy. Energy is not good nor bad. It matters what you can do with the energy. We all have the power. We are all alchemists. We are all energetic beings. We all can change, transform. We all don't have to be stuck to a certain version of ourselves. We all are here to evolve. We are all spiritual beings. And this episode concludes season 1. I thought it was really important for me to introduce myself, introduce my childhood self throughout season 1. So in the forthcoming seasons, I can say with the utmost confidence the wisdom that I have learned throughout the years. And I'm really excited and thankful for everyone that has been with me throughout this season and will continue to tune in and grow with me for every season that is to come. I feel so powerful to be walking in my calling and to have the strength to share my stories, because I know I'm not the only one that have experienced these experiences. We all are much more alike than we are different. And I'm here to bring awareness to that. Thank you so much for listening, y'all. Till next time.